tuned into another episode of Victoria Jenn TV, and today we're interviewing Jacquette Timmons. Have you ever been with your girlfriend or your hubby and the topic of money comes up and things just get really uncomfortable? What about if you're on the dating scene and you want to bring up money but you just don't want things to get awkward? Well, Jacquette has managed to create a career around all things relationships and all things finances. She'll be dropping her tips and strategies on how to talk about money with your significant other, with family and friends, or when you're even on the dating scene. So grab your pen, grab your notepad, because she's going to be dropping some major gems for us. I am so excited about this interview. Hope you guys enjoy it. Hey guys, you are tuned in to another episode of Victoria Jenn TV, and I am super pumped about my guest today because we are going to be talking about all things uncomfortable. What do I mean by that? What are things that you normally feel uncomfortable about? Well, I know for a lot of us, it's money. So we're going to be talking about money today. So Jacquette Timmons, tell us about what you do so folks are aware, and then we can dive deep into it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah.
I work as a financial behaviorist, and what that means is that I focus on the human side of money. And I work with my clients, whether it's doing one-on-one coaching with singles, couples, and entrepreneurs, or even in my speaking engagements, getting people to prioritize their financial behavior, their choices, and their emotions with money over just crunching the math of it.
So what have you found to be maybe, what was your biggest aha moment on this journey of what you're doing?
Oh my God. Biggest aha moment. I think the biggest aha moment really is the crux of why I do what I do, and that is the myth or the belief that your success with money is driven by how well the numbers add up. And if that were true, then everybody would be really wealthy, would be really rich. They'd have all the money that they needed because 2 + 2 is always going to equal 4. But that's not the case. And yet that's the piece that people always focus on. And I think that that's also the piece that kind of blocks us because we don't give credence to your emotions, the influence of your choices, the influence of your mindset, the influence of your beliefs. Like all of that plays out into how does that 2 + 2 add up?
That is interesting. And I think what also plays into that are the relationships that you maintain. So let's talk about that because that's the juice, honey. I want that tea. So how important is it for people to really think about what does their partner bring to the table financially, especially if you're a woman as an example, because you know a lot of us ladies nowadays, we killing it out here, right? And more likely than not making more money than the fellas. So how do we go into those conversations? How do we manage that? Really interesting to kind of hear your perspective.
I think one of the first things people have to get over is expecting that the conversation isn't going to be uncomfortable. It just is. It's awkward. And so I think part of the problem is this expectation that it should be anything other than that. So that's the first thing. Like just embrace and accept it's going to be uncomfortable. So that's that. The other thing that I think is really helpful is understanding that you have your relationship with money, they have their relationship with money, and then it's your relationship with money as a couple. So if we think of it as a Venn diagram, right? There's you, there's your partner, there's money, and that's that section where all three of those circles overlap. That's where it gets really juicy in terms of what your relationship with money is, what is his or her relationship with money, and how are you all coming together with that. Yeah.
What is the research showing, though, as when we think about relationships and its correlation to money?
So one of the things that was really interesting is when I was doing research for my book, Financial Intimacy, was getting...
I love that title, by the way.
Thank you. Because that's what it's all about, intimacy. But in doing the research, discovering that you are actually more than likely going to be attracted to the person who has the exact opposite approach to money than you do. So if you are a saver, you are likely going to attract a spender. If you are a spender, you're likely going to attract a saver. And if you do attract someone who's the same as you, one of you will scale back. And I thought that that was so fascinating that, that there's research to prove this, but then it kind of really made sense just from a nature standpoint, in that I think part of when you're in a relationship is being with someone that's going to prompt you to grow or to evolve and change. And so that just makes sense that it would also happen when it comes to money.
But what happens if you are the one who has your shit together, right? You're the one who has it all together, so you're not looking for the development, but yet the research shows us that we still want to be with somebody who is not as financially stable as we are, essentially.
So there are a couple of things there, right?
Yeah.
So I think one thing I personally believe, and this is one of the things that I just espouse whenever I have a chance, is that it's never just about the money. So yeah, you may have your act together and the other person may not, and it may feel as though that disparity is only coming up when it pertains to money. But the truth of the matter is it's never just about money. Money is a communication tool, and if you allow it to be. And so what people are really bumping heads against when it comes to that are your values, your beliefs, your expectations, your family background, and how they're shaping what you want and need, and what you think the other person should want and need and bring to the table. So that's all of this stuff that actually is being worked on and worked out, and money is simply the vehicle for that.
Interesting. So you're saying that it's not necessarily that we're out and eager to find those opposite of us as it relates to money. It's more about finding people who are opposite of us as it relates to emotions.
Yeah, and I don't know if I don't think we consciously say I'm X way and I want to attract someone that's Y way.
Right.
I think it's just one of those things that tends to happen, and clearly, I don't think anyway you can be with someone who is dramatically different than you from a value standpoint, for example. I don't think opposite ends of the spectrum dramatically works in that regard. At the same time, though, I think that the likelihood that you're going to find someone who thinks exactly the way that you do, who approaches everything in precisely the way that you do, is an unrealistic expectation.
I could agree with that. So what exactly is emotional money? Like, what does that term mean? And what are some taboos that are associated with it?
So we've already touched upon them, for example. So I think one of the ways to kind of define it is to perhaps give examples.
Okay.
So we were just talking about couples and money, and I'm thinking of one couple where they lived together for 4 years before they got married. And while they were living together, they split everything 50-50. They now get married. The expectation is that now things are not going to be 50-50. They're going to be proportional. And, oh, by the way, we're going to have joint accounts. But that was not a conversation that was had pre-marriage. And both of them actually, one person thought that was going to continue the pattern that they had living together. And the other person thought, well, no, as soon as we get married, all this is going to change. And so that would be an example, I hope,
Yes.
of how the emotions come into play, because you're just assuming that someone's going to do what you automatically do or saw growing up or expected.
So what are some tips that you have when you want to approach the topic of money? And let's give two scenarios. So the first scenario is you're just dating somebody, but money's important. You could be wasting your whole entire time with this person. It's best to get it out the way early. At least that's my opinion. So how do you approach that? And then the second scenario is when things are getting really serious and you need to revisit and really talk about what is going on with them financially, joint accounts, all of that stuff. So both of those scenarios. So let's start with, starting to date somebody.
So first of all, I think the first thing you have to do is get really clear about what your own story with money is. What's your own financial intimacy? Because I think before you can actually cultivate it in a healthy way with someone else, you have to first cultivate it in a healthy way with yourself. And that doesn't mean everything is perfect. It doesn't mean that you don't have debt. It doesn't mean that you're not trying to perhaps boost your credit score or, improve your balance sheet. It just means that you have an understanding of why things might be the way that they are. So I think that's the first thing, like understand what you're bringing to the table.
Right.
The second thing, especially when you're dating, observe Observe, observe, observe. Like, pay attention. Does the person always pay with a credit card or a debit card? Do they always pay with cash? How do you, if you get close enough, do you see unopened bills when you go to their home? Like, what are some of the things that you were noticing? What are some of the things that you were even tuning into when you hear them talk about money, when you hear them talk about either their job or their business? Pay attention, because all of that to me are seeds that are clues for what you can expect when it does indeed become a little bit deeper. So that's dating. Observe, observe, observe.
So and you don't bring it up. Just observe.
Well, I think initially it is observe. Just observe and be really clear about what your non-negotiables are, so that if you see those being played out, that's a conversation. It doesn't mean that it is a stop, don't go forward, but it is a conversation starter. So observe, know what your non-negotiables are, and then compare that to what you are seeing.
So should you be out to dinner with this new person you're dating and saying, listen, what tax bracket are you in? How much do you have in your 401k? Do you have an IRA? What type of investment assets do you have? What is your retirement plans? How much do you save of your income? I feel like those are adult conversations.
Those are very much so adult conversations. Right? And I don't think any question is off the table.
Right.
However, my caveat is, don't ask a question that you are not prepared to answer. So if you don't feel comfortable sharing the same data points that you're asking, then you don't have a right to ask it. And in terms of timing, some people, I have a friend, she met her husband, and 3 weeks later, he was like, you're going to be my wife. And 6 months later, they were married. So who knows in terms of timing, whether or not you should have that conversation 3 weeks in, 3 months in, or 3 years in. It depends on the relationship.
Yeah.
But the thing that I always fall back on is, don't ask a question that you are not prepared to also answer. And in fact, that could be a really great way of initiating the conversation, of saying, hey, this is what I have, or this is what I do, or this is why I do what I do. What's up with you?
Interesting.
It can be as casual, even though it's a loaded question. It can be as casual as that.
That is interesting, and money. It blows my mind how uncomfortable the conversations around money can be when we find ourselves having conversations, let's say, about sex. We will enter a conversation about our physical intimacy way before we will talk about our financial intimacy. Why is that?
Oh, I wish I had a really good answer, other than the fact that, for whatever strange reason, talking about money is more taboo than talking about sex.
Right.
I don't understand it. Both to me are very, very intimate.
Yeah.
So why does one, on a scale have why does one have a lesser taboo to it, taboo score to it, if you will? I don't really know. Having said that, though, your setup for this was really interesting, because that's one of the reasons why I started the dinners that I was telling you about before we started recording. And it's because someone said to me, I can talk to my girlfriends about sex all the time. I can't talk to them about money. And so I wanted to create a safe space for people to have what I consider those vulnerable conversations around money. So the why, I don't know. I think it is probably, we can trace it just back to
culturally, I
think.
Yeah.
I mean, it has been the kind of thing where, growing up,
especially women
in the 40s, 50s, 60s, you don't talk about money. You don't talk about
thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so let's visit the other scenario. So you're in a relationship with somebody, you realize things are getting serious. What are some things you should be thinking about if you are truly viewing someone as long-term?
So I think thinking about it through the lens of how are you going to manage money, which is very different than how are you going to invest it. Because when I'm thinking managing, I'm thinking day to day. Who's paying the bills? How are those getting paid? How are you aggregating who's responsible for what. So to me, that goes in one bucket. Then there is the investment management of your assets. Then there's just general decisions. Then there are just rules. Like, do you have the kind of situation where you don't have to consult with one another around purchases? Or do you have a rule that says you can do whatever you want, but if X costs more than $500, then we need to have a conversation. So you need to figure out what those rules are for you. And I don't believe in one size fits all. I think every relationship comes with its own.
Customize it.
Exactly. But knowing that you have rules to follow, you have a system that you need to come up with. Like, what's that system for tracking, for managing the money, for making investment decisions, for all those sorts of things? That's important. And I think the other thing that's really important is don't fall into the habit of only talking about money when there's a transaction to be had, or when there's a crisis, or when you're pissed off. If those are the only 3 times that you talk about money, then you're setting yourself up to have a really unhealthy relationship when it comes to money, because then you're always walking on like eggshells.
Right. So you should be like in Malibu on like the beach and be like, hey, honey, we should make this investment because there's a 15% return. How do you feel?
Well, maybe not like that. However, that could work. My suggestion is I really want it to become as casual between couples to talk about money as it is, what are we going to have for dinner tonight?
Right.
Am I cooking? Are you cooking? Are we going to a restaurant? Are we taking out? Like, what are we doing? Like, just as much detachment as you have around that, I would love for that to also be the sort of energy that we bring to money. But I think the only way that you can get to that is if you normalize talking about money. Yes. So one of my suggestions to people is to check in with one another each week. Where are we? What are your goals? What are our goals? Because that's another thing too. Like, I don't think people really pay attention to the fact that just because you're in a couple doesn't mean that your respective goals go away. And here's the thing. There's a finite, I don't care how much abundance thinking you want to embrace, and I'm all for it. But at the end of the day, if you only have $1,000 right now, you only have $1,000 right now.
Right.
And that $1,000 has to finance your goals. So which are going to be the priority? Because you have yours, his and hers, and mine, or ours, I should say, right? And sometimes not all 3 of those buckets can get your attention. They can't get your money at the moment. So what are you going to prioritize? And those are the sorts of things that I think need to be discussed, agreed upon, and measured and tracked, or tracked and measured.
So can you talk to us about women versus money and men versus money? Is it true that men manage money better than women? Like, what have you seen in your line of work as it relates to the genders?
So research says, from a gender standpoint, that women are better investors than men. And I think that comes from being a little less risk, or I should say a little more risk averse is a better way of saying it. And we tend not to be traders, whereas men tend to be more risk desirous, I guess, is a word you could say, and tend to be more traders. So that's research on the investment side. When it comes to just generally how men and women interact with money, it's been my experience that it's across the board. In my coaching practice, I have had men in the relationships be the one that actually reach out to me and say, we need help. And they're the ones sometimes that are not as adept as their wife is in terms of the money. So I have a hard time in general saying that men are different, or men are better or worse, or women are better and worse when it comes to just general money management. But from a research standpoint, women are better than men when it comes to investing.
Interesting. I mean, that makes sense, because women out here investing in a whole lot of things, not just financial instruments, but we invested in the fellas in a lot of ways, right?
True.
We are investing all around. So it does in ourselves, right?
Yep.
In our development, we see the acceleration there. So I could see how that research would make sense. So
you spoke about your coaching business, and what I love about your story and what I truly admire is you've been an entrepreneur for a long time now. How many years has it been?
Since 1995. So, what is that? 33 years?
30?
No,
3 years?
No, 95. 23 years.
23 years.
23 years.
23 years. Okay?
Long time.
23 years you've been able to establish your business, build scale, and really create this revenue stream for yourself. So I would love for you to walk us through that journey, and also the mindset shift you had to make from this being a hobby or a side hustle of yours to this now actually being your main flow of income, and what that looks like and how you have to treat money differently in order for you to succeed.
Sure. So I think the one thing I want to definitely get across is that the business that I have today is not the business that I had 23 years ago. So it evolved. It was never a side hustle. It started off as this is what I'm doing full time, and it was an evolution of what I had been doing at Bankers Trust, which is now Deutsche Bank, after being a part of a group in the private bank that started an investment management arm. So my first business, or my first iteration of my business, was to actually be a manager of managing money for high net worth individuals and smaller nonprofit organizations. And I was doing that for like 4 years. And then I just hit a wall. I hit a wall because I wasn't making as much money as I thought that I should have. I wasn't making as much money as I was back at BT. And I was just really, really frustrated. But every single time I was like, all right, maybe I'm just really not cut out for this. I should just close up shop and go in-house somewhere. I'd get one more client. And
Funny how the universe always gives
yeah,
us those signals. It's like, no, girl, keep going.
Keep going, exactly.
Yeah.
And so the way that it works, or the way that my firm was set up at the time, is that I was charging a percentage based on assets under management. So that would mean that I would get paid a quarter later for what was ever under management before. Mm-hmm. And I would always, that one or two clients would get me through the next quarter or the next 6 months. So that was me saying, all right, well, I don't know what this means, but I guess I'm supposed to stay with this. Mm-hmm. But I was smart enough to start working with a coach. And the coach said to me, I'll never forget him, his name is Mark Monchek. He said to me, I don't understand why you're trying to force this to happen. You are, not literally, but figuratively, knocking on other people's doors, asking them to have you manage their money, but you're not paying attention that people are coming to you, asking you to create investment education experiences. And I said, that's interesting. Now, why that's interesting is I started my firm in 95. I did my first workshop in 1996 for a national nonprofit organization. And I kept getting referral after referral after referral. And I even had a corporate client who had me go to the Caribbean, to St. Thomas, to do a 3-day workshop for all of their Caribbean-based employees. From my perspective, I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Yeah. I'm traveling all over the place. Right. I'm having a ball. I get to work for a couple of hours in the morning and then hang out on the beach in the afternoon. How could that be bad? But I didn't think of it as a business. I thought this is a great supplement to the investment management arm. Part of that was my ego. I was all tied up and I want to be a money manager. Mm-hmm. So when he put that question out there, I went back and I looked at my numbers, and to my shock horror, that is when I realized that, wow, I thought that the education was supplementing the investment management.
It was the other way
and
around.
It was the other way around. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, all right, God, I got you.
I see what you're doing.
I'm finally now paying attention.
Right.
And so thus began the, slow process of unwinding the investment management piece and focusing on the investment education piece, and approaching that in a very different way than I had been doing before, since that was now going to be my primary way of doing business and earning a living. The coaching grew out of that, because then people would say, after this great workshop, now we want coaching. So it was all really an evolution. And there have been times when, it wasn't great and I needed to supplement. So, again, another shakara. I went and got a temp job and would supplement that. So it was never a side business, but there were times when it wasn't generating enough where I would have to do something to actually make sure that I could still be here 23 years later.
So in those moments where it wasn't enough, what really motivated you to keep at it?
I would ask myself the question, do I believe I've done absolutely everything that I could? And since every time I would ask that question, the answer was no, there's still more for you to do, I would just have to say, well, then you have to figure it out. Like, you have a whole ancestry of people who have figured it out, who had less resources to work with. Then you need to figure this out. So that's what really kept me going.
So talk to us about, what does your model look like now?
So I have what I call the consumer-facing side, which is where I do one-on-one coaching with singles, couples, and entrepreneurs. And then I have the institutional-facing side, where I do workshops, I do keynotes, I sit on panels, and those are either for corporations, nonprofits, or conference organizers. And regardless of what might be the theme of the event or what title we might massage to fit into their overall agenda, they're bringing me on to talk about the intersection of emotions and money.
Interesting. And why is that so important for people to just understand that they're so closely correlated?
So I think that for me, I'd like to answer that by sharing the seed that was planted for me, that there was something else going on. So I have been working in financial services on Wall Street since '86. I saw up close and personal the crash of '87. And the thing that just was really poignant for me was the dramatically different responses to that one-day event. There were some people that were really calm, like, whatever. And then there were other people that were freaking out. And like, literally, if they could have jumped out of a window, they would have, because of the money that they lost for themselves and for their clients. And that struck me because I was just like, well, why is that? And I didn't have the language back then to describe it in the way that I would now, other than to say, one thing happened, the market dropped 500 points, people are going crazy, losing their minds, and then there's this other camp of people that are just like, this is another day. And I was curious, like, why is that? And so that thus began my wanting to have a better understanding around behavioral economics, behavioral finance. It was then further amplified by my working in the private bank and seeing how people who, and let me just say, in the private bank, you're working with some really, really wealthy families and individuals, right? And just recognizing that, just because you have a couple more commas and several zeros behind those commas, that doesn't make you immune from the same sort of concerns that the person who is struggling to make that $1.20 or make that 25 cents a dollar. Like, everybody wants to feel confident that they're making the right choices. Everybody wants to feel in control, and that has absolutely nothing to do with your income or your wealth. And so to me, that's what really drives wanting to understand and wanting to get other people to embrace this idea that it's not just about the dollars and cents, that it's so much about your emotions and your choices and your actions and your beliefs and your values and your expectations and all that.
Do you have a story to share with us with your one-on-one practice around something that you saw was outside of this world, or just a story, a really good story for us to just really wrap our heads around this concept of financial behavior? Make it a juicy one. No names. No,
I would never do that. Yeah. No names, and like also maybe tweak the details.
Yeah, just a little bit,
so no one feels like they're being outed. What's a good example? Here's an example. I think it's a good example. And here's why I think it's a good example. I think it's a good example because, again, we have this tendency to make an assumption that people who do really, really well with money or let me rephrase that. People who earn a lot of money don't have financial challenges. And so there's
more money, more problems.
Biggie
said it best.
Well, here's one thing that I always tell people too, and I'll get back to the story, is because someone said to me, oh, my goal is I don't ever want to have to worry about money. And I was like, well, you're not going to like what I have to say. Right. Because my whole thing is that doesn't go away. Like, what you worry about shifts. But worrying doesn't go away. So right now, your worry might be living paycheck to paycheck or client to client. But then once you resolve that shifts into something else. If it's a business, how do you grow it to the next level and do that sustainably? If it's a job, how do you position yourself for the next opportunity or the next promotion? So the worry doesn't go away. The focus of the worry is what shifts. But back to this person, they earn about $1 million, but they also spend $1.1 million. And so getting them to see that, what is it that the things that you're spending money on, what is that feeding? Because it's feeding something. And we need to figure out what is being fed, why are you using money as the tool for feeding that, and then what could we replace it with? And so that's an opportunity for that person to do a little bit of reflection, looking into their family background, understanding more about why they do the things that they do, understanding more about their sense of responsibility, because they also happen to be the first in their family to have gone to college, to have gone to graduate school, to be doing as well as they are, and they feel a sense of, I need to take care of everybody. But sometimes you need to have some boundaries. And so those are all of the sorts of things that we kind of talk about and explore through conversation, through exercises, and all of that, so that they can get to the point where they're not continuing to spend $1.1 million.
Interesting. That's like when friends of mine, they're stressed, they go and they shop. Or they're celebrating a win, they go and they shop, right? And it's the emotion that is driving them to feel like they need to go and shop, because once they purchase it, there's an emotional utopia that they go through as a result of making the purchase.
Absolutely.
Very interesting.
Like, one of the exercises that I have people do, and some people view this as a budgeting exercise, and it has something that has absolutely nothing to do with budgeting. My reason for suggesting it has nothing to do with budgeting. But I always encourage people to track their money and to make note of how much they're spending, on what they're spending, when are they doing it, because timing of the month can give you a really, especially for women, can give you a sense of whether or not your spending pattern is tied to how you were feeling hormonally, whether or not something was a need or a want, or whether it was planned or unplanned. And just tracking that with no judgment attached to it can give you a great deal of insight around why you do the things that you do with your money.
Interesting. So going back to relationships, I asked each of one of my guests to tell me what collaboration means to them. And I know in relationships that is super important, especially when you think about money. So what does collaboration mean to you?
Succinctly, it means support. In a more elaborate description, it means a lot of different things, because I think collaboration can show up in a variety of different ways. So as an example, I view this as a collaboration, right? I view when you actually reach out to your mentor or someone that you look up to whose advice that you respect and appreciate. I view that as collaboration because they're giving you feedback. Or if you're the one that's providing feedback, I view that as collaboration. I view when people actually team up to create something. So they have two separate businesses, but then they're creating something that they're going to put on market. That is a collaboration. So I think the form of the collaboration can look very, very different, but at the root of it, it is support. And it is support with the intention of whatever you're doing together, or however, you're providing feedback or I'm giving feedback, that's going to help that end product be even better for that end user and how that end user experiences what you have to offer.
I like that answer. So What is your advice for our viewers out there who are trying to disconnect the emotion from money, or they're trying to figure out how they can prevent themselves from taking on certain behaviors as it relates to money? What are some kind of like simple things that they can do to start managing their money differently?
So one thing, you can't separate the emotional part from money. You just can't. It just is. That said, I think, though, that you can put yourself in a position so that you are leading your emotions as opposed to being pushed by your emotions. So I think at all times, the posture is the same, right? This is you and this is your emotions. The question is, are you leading it, or are you being pushed by it? The posture stays the same. So in terms of managing it, I think the first thing is data. Going back to the tracking, collecting the data and then taking the time to review it, and doing that in an objective, non-judgmental way to see, what is this telling me? And one of the other reasons why I also harp on the tracking is because I feel like your bank and all the places where you shop know more about your behavior with money than many of us do.
Very true.
And we assume that simply because we have access to it in our smartphones, that then means that we are enlightened and we have a lot of insight. And that's just so untrue. So the tracking, making sure you don't set it and forget it, having rules around it.
Are there any apps like people can use?
Oh, there are a ton of apps. And what I say to people is, try all of them that appeal to you to see which one really resonates with you. Mm-hmm. So as an example, I use Quicken. I use Quicken Deluxe and a spreadsheet. I've been using Quicken Deluxe since 1995 when I first started my business.
Loyalty customer.
There's no way. Now, and to tell you how much is a loyalty customer thing, I'm a Mac person and I have a PC just for Quicken, because the thought of moving, it just scares just gives me shivers.
Yeah.
So I always say, whether it's Quicken, whether it's Mint, whether it's Pocket Guard or personal, whatever it is, try it. And for couples, there's something called Honeydew. So try it, see if you like it. But use what works best for you. Use the tool that works best for you. And for me, there are two tools: Quicken and a spreadsheet. And none of that may sound like that's answering the question around your emotions, but I think emotions play into all of those things. And so when you're mapping it all out, that helps you to see what's coming up for you. Why are you responding the way that you are? Is it because you're being influenced by what your family is expecting, your partner is expecting, what society at large is expecting of you, or is it something internally driven? Mm-hmm. And if you put it out on paper, which is what I highly recommend for people, think on paper, that can give you a better way of deciding, I don't want to choose that way anymore, so let me do this. Or actually, I've been choosing this way and it works well. How can I do more of it? Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I think it answers, but you tell me if that answers your question.
No, that makes sense. And I think those are helpful tips, especially with the apps, because we are so connected to our phone. The more easy we make it for ourselves to really track our money, the more fluidity will be in it, so that we don't look at it as a chore. It's just happening automatically.
But making the time to actually review it is
the
so
analyze
key.
part, right?
Yes.
And the assessment piece. Yeah, I think that's what people get. Like, I'm tracking my finances. I'm being responsible. I'm being an adult.
And I don't say that from a preachy standpoint. I say that because that is the problem that I had, in that I didn't know that more of my revenue was coming from education.
Right.
I was tracking it. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't looking at it. Right. And had I done that, I would have seen the same thing that my coach saw before I had a chance to see it.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why I'm such an advocate for, don't just track it, but make sure you have a system in place for going back and analyzing it. Mm-hmm. And here's another example. So one of the things that I personally do for my business is a quarterly review. And I'll look at, all right, what was my goal at the beginning of January? Where did I land in March? If we're looking at this year, and I didn't hit my goal, but yet at the same time, the goal that I did hit, I was like, oh, that wasn't so bad. So, but that only came because I spent the time to collect the data and then spent the time to actually review it. And I didn't let other things get in the way. And I think that's really important for those folks that are watching, that are listening, that are entrepreneurs. Don't get so caught up in doing the work that you don't take some time to assess the work that you're doing.
Yes, I think a lot of people struggle with that, for sure. I'm thinking about myself, and I'm like, yeah, I need to go home and do some assessing. For sure.
Yeah, make a date with yourself.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much.
Oh,
this has been
thank you.
super informative for me, and I know for the audience as well. How can people find you? How can they learn more about you? Where should they go?
Awesome. So I would love to encourage people to do the financial wheel exercise. So they can go to JacquetteTimmons.com/wheel.
Okay.
And the reason why I recommend that is that it gives you an opportunity to look at the financial vision that you want to create for your life. And I think far too often we don't start there. We start with what is in front of us right now. And I think it's helpful to expand the horizon, think about what the financial vision is, and then back into, well, how do you make that happen? And that exercise will help people to do that.
I love that. Look, she's giving you a freebie already, guys. You're already earning something as a result of watching this show. And we'll make sure to put the information in the comments so you guys will have it. No worries about that. But thank you so much for coming on the show today.
I really appreciate
you and
Likewise.
all of the gems that you dropped today. And all the juice and the tea that you shared with them. The relationship conversations were super insightful. And look forward to perhaps working with you one day and thinking about how you can help me get my life together around my finances and the analyzed part and the assessment and figuring out what goals and trends. So I need to download that wheel myself. But thank you so much again for being on the show.